Yep, we all know this one was coming from a mile away. Today, everyone on average is a lot more, how can I say this politely, emotionally expressive and courageously vulnerable. Or in other words, easily provoked or offended towards misdemeanor and wildly insecure of our own shortcomings in both our circumstances and identity. Most of us literally have the emotional tolerance level of a toddler getting his favorite teddy bear ripped off due to his own excitement. We just can't take jokes or sarcasm that lightly anymore. We apparently can't just ignore online trolls, and we always have to forcefully and often explicitly prove our point to someone for verbally ridiculing us online. We've become too soft, fragile, brittle, frail, flimsy, and thin-skinned. And of course, most of you gentlemen who've been watching this channel for a while knows what the universally general reasons are. The way civilization has evolved towards peaceful and tamed domestication, where the introduction and implementation of technology in our lives is catered relentlessly towards ease of access, complacency, and convenience. Or in other words, inadvertently invigorating and incentivizing laziness or inaction for society. Having a spoiled, unconditioned, or unqualified background, where all manners of adversity and necessary qualities that an individual has to develop during their upbringings, like taking full responsibility and accountability, is all being overly handled by their overly involving parents, or worse, being entirely untaught or unencouraged by their overly involving parents, or due to the absence of them. The age of emotionalism, arguably one of the most well-known, discussed, and debated topic of the modern age of gynocentrism, where we're taught and encouraged to be in touch with our emotions and to freely express them at our will however we want, without the necessity of developing the ability to objectively decide the safest and most productive way to do such a thing. Seriously, this is how we, as a fully functioning society, have managed to produce online death threats, midnight stabbers, and school shooters these days. And of course, genetical disposition. As the first law of behavioral genetics said, all human behavioral traits are heritable or partially heritable. Now, this can be used by many of you as the most effective apparent excuse for one's own hypersensitivity. I was born with it, there is nothing I can do about it. But that doesn't change the fact that you can bring yourself to become highly aware of it and do your best to develop ways to try and control it in order to mitigate its effects. Now, those are the general reasons that all of us are somewhat familiar with. But now let's discuss the more intimate and personal reasons that caused us to become so easily enticed towards emotional reaction and outbursts. And let's just get straight to the point, shall we? It's because we invest too much of our identities and egos respectively into both our underlying insecurities and our personalized belief sets. Coupled with emotionalism, in today's age of social media, we have been brought way more visceral clarity of our own weaknesses, discrepancies, or faults than ever before. As the more connected we've become, the more exposed and antagonistic we've also become. Like I've said before, human beings have no choice but to make comparisons with one another in order to make further objective sense to the judgment of our status and circumstances. And when we sense that these judgments from ourselves and from others surrounding us are not optimal to our state of autonomy, we either try to find ways to fix the issue or we go on the defensive to protect our self-esteem. The latter is what is meant by quote-unquote taking it personally. Often by trying to overly justify and denying our own weaknesses and or trying to attack and cripple others' sense of autonomy and self-esteem to draw attention away from our own concealed issues. We hate the feelings of inferiority, disposability, and unfamiliarity or lack of control that our weaknesses will expose us to, because it innately makes us feel like outcasts or the least required or valuable for the tribe. And we all know that human beings absolutely hate the feeling of being isolated or being the only one out. When it comes to our specific insecurities, we all have our own fair share of them. We try to hide it as best as we can so that other people won't utilize them against us and make us food for their equally brittle sense of self-esteem. Understand first and foremost that you're not alone in this. Other people, and I mean every single person, also have their own collection of underlying issues just like you, that you can sense if you're careful enough to spot the leakage, often through the sudden change in their facial expressions when a specific attribute is being discussed. Now, the problem with hiding these insecurities or trying to ignore them completely is that you never really get to know the full, honest extent of their effect on your mental state until you get exposed for them or someone called you out on them. What we resist will always persist. And the more you resist them, the more potent their effects will be on you because you don't have any psychological method to deal with that particular feeling of crisis, thus getting you unconsciously and imminently invested into them to desperately figure out a solution to your crippled autonomy. And when you can't, it's resulted into a feeling of personal attack, because it's the easiest way out to attack or blame someone or something in order to forget our own issues. The only way you can eventually come to terms with your insecurities is to either be completely honest with yourself and peacefully realize that there is nothing you can do about them, mostly reserved for insecurities that you can't control like your height and troubled past, and or find a way or multiple ways to compensate for them, either by finding substitute qualities or attributes to cultivate on to eventually overshadow them, or simply maximizing what you can get out of them by turning them as productive as possible, like going to the gym to get bigger. When it comes to our belief sets, it's not just about religions, agendas, and political movements that we firmly adhere ourselves to, but also our habits, interests, values, lifestyles, and perspectives towards many circumstances. We attach ourselves heavily on these belief sets because they give us structure and hope for a better life in the future. In other words, tremendous ego investments towards solipsism, helping us tremendously in our sense of confidence, authority, and optimism. And when we find out, or most of the times, others find out for us or criticizes us that there are prices to pay and imperfections lingering with our belief sets, you guessed it, we go full on defensive to desperately prove that we are absolutes. In the end, you're only going to tire yourself out endlessly trying to convince everyone that you are the right one. The only way to let this go is to fully understand and accept that every single person will look at the world from different lenses or ever so slightly different lenses. And they will always have their own unique perspectives and judgments towards everything. However, with that being said, we must never become mentally too rigid and adamant towards our belief sets, because it will cause us to become diabolically insistent, getting us to become even more sensitive and critical towards opposing views. We always want to understand things from different perspectives, as they will provide us with more information to better solidify our judgments, which will eventually make us more confident in seeing how circumstances actually function. Only time will eventually unravel who is in the right and who is in the wrong. My only advice to you is to adhere yourself as much as possible towards objective truth and reality, the practical causes and effects. So in the end, taking things personally is all about optimizing your level of awareness or ignorance towards your own fears and the level of flexibility or rigidity towards your ideals. Unfortunately, in this day of age of constantly chasing dopamine, such a task will be too much for the new generation to fathom and take seriously until a dire consequence befall them due to their own impulsivity. So I personally think it will only get much worse from here on out. Thank you for watching.